My world is a grid of interlocking fields of fire. It's the dead space under the west perimeter wall, the blind spot on camera 7 by the reflecting pool, the 37 seconds it takes my team to get from the barracks to the main house. I do not live in a home. I live in a fortress, and I am its keeper. My name is Isla Vargas. To the world, I am a ghost. To the 5-person household staff and my 12-member security team, I am simply ma'am. But to the man who owns this fortress, the reclusive tech billionaire Enrique Sandoval, I am the closest thing he has to a daughter. And to everyone else, the very few who ever get close enough to see me, I am presumed to be his daughter. It is a simple, useful misconception, one I have never had a reason to correct. Because in the world of the ultra-wealthy, a daughter is a princess to be protected. A head of security is a threat to be neutralized. I have always found it safer to be underestimated. Typical day for me begins at 0500, a 5-mile run along the perimeter, followed by 2 hours of hand-to-hand and weapons training in the gym I designed in the estate's converted bomb shelter. By the time Mr. Sandoval wakes, I have already reviewed the overnight reports, checked the integrity of every seal on the property, and run a dozen threat assessment scenarios through my head. My job is to see the bullet before the trigger is pulled, to see the lie before it is spoken, to see the end before it begins. It is the only life I have ever known. He found me in an orphanage in Quezon City when I was 16. A quiet, angry girl with fists that were faster than her words. He had lost his own family years before, a wife and daughter, taken by a sickness that all his money could not cure. He was a man haunted by the ghosts of those he could not protect. I think, in a way, protecting him was my way of protecting the memory of them. He gave me a purpose. He funded my education, sent me to the best military academies in the world. And when I came out, forged and hardened by years of brutal training, he gave me his life to protect. He trusted me. And trust is the one thing in this world I value more than my own life. Good morning, Isa, he said, his voice a soft rumble. I was in the control room, a dark, cool space behind a 2-way mirror that looked out over his private study. He was sitting in his favorite leather armchair, a cup of tea in his hand, looking at a framed photo on his desk. Good morning, sir, I replied, my voice calm and professional through the small speaker. Still calling me sir after all these years, he chuckled. He looked up at the mirror, though I knew he couldn't see me. My family is from Cybalom, you know. An antique. We never called our elders sir. It was always Tito, Tita, Lolo, uncle, aunt, grandfather. It is a sign of respect, yes, but also of love. I remained silent. We'd had this conversation before. My professionalism was a wall I had built to protect not just him, but myself. You work too hard, he continued, his voice gentle. This fortress. It is also a prison for you, I think. You are 32 years old. You need a life outside these walls. My life is inside these walls, sir, I said. My purpose is here. He sighed, a sound of fatherly resignation. One day, I said, I hope you find a purpose that is just for you. He turned back to his work. We have the National Art Gallery benefit tonight. Are we prepared? Yes, sir, I said, my eyes scanning the monitors. Advance team swept the venue this morning. I'll be on primary close protection. We're prepared for everything. Everything, it turned out, except him. The National Art Gallery was my worst nightmare. A cavernous space with 100 entrances and exits, filled with the one thing I couldn't predict or control, the Manila elite. A glittering, chattering swarm of socialites, politicians, and parasites, all drawn to the flame of my boss's wealth and influence. My job was to move through them like a shark, unseen, my eyes constantly scanning for the anomalies, the predators. I wore a simple, elegant black dress, a stark contrast to the jewel-toned gowns around me. My weapon was a small ceramic pistol holstered in the small of my back, invisible. My communications were a nearly invisible earpiece. I was a shadow at Mr. Sandoval's shoulder, my face a mask of polite neutrality. For 2 hours, it was a routine operation. I deflected sycophants, monitored the perimeter, and never let Mr. Sandoval out of my sight. Then, he needed to take a private call with his board of directors. He retreated to a secured room we had established, and I took up a post outside, giving him a 10-foot bubble of privacy. For the first time all night, I was stationary. And for the first time all night, I allowed myself to look not at the crowd, but at the art dot. There was a painting on the wall opposite me. It was a Zobel, a frantic, beautiful storm of black calligraphic lines on a stark white canvas. It was chaotic, but it had a strange, powerful grace. For a moment, I forgot where I was. I forgot the mission. I was just a woman looking at a painting. It's incredible, isn't it? A voice said, low and smooth, right beside me. My training kicked in. My body tensed, my hand instinctively twitching towards the small of my back. I had been so absorbed, I hadn't heard him approach. A fatal error. I turned, my eyes instantly cataloging him. Male, mid-30s, Filipino. Approximately 6 feet tall, athletic build. He was wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that was expensive but not flashy. His watch was a vintage Omega. His shoes were handmade. He wasn't old money, but he was comfortable in it. His face was handsome, with intelligent, dark eyes and a smile that was disarmingly genuine. He was not looking at Mr. Sandoval's guarded door. He was looking at the painting, and then he turned that smile on me. Sida 53, he said, nodding at the painting. It's from Zobel's Sida series. He painted them in the late 50s, inspired by the flamenco songs of the same name. He tried to capture the long, agonizing cry of the music in a single gesture. I was momentarily stunned into silence. He wasn't trying to sell me something. He wasn't trying to get to my boss. He was talking about the art. Yes, I managed to say. It's powerful. It is, he agreed. Most people in this room see art as an investment, something to be acquired. It's refreshing to see someone actually looking at it. His eyes met mine, and they held a spark of genuine curiosity. I'm Julian Cruz. He held out his hand. I hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. My protocol was clear. Do not engage. Do not give out personal information. But my name was not a state secret, and he was making no move towards Mr. Sandoval. Isla, I said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, his hand warm. Isla, he repeated, as if tasting the name. It's a beautiful name. Your father is Enrique Sandoval, correct? A brilliant man. What he's done with his AI logistics company is revolutionary. There it was, the inevitable connection. But he'd done it differently. He hadn't asked if I was the daughter. He had stated it as a fact, then immediately pivoted to praising my father's work, not asking for an introduction. It was smooth. Too smooth. He's a very private man, I said, my voice turning cool, professional. A warning, of course, Julian said, immediately picking up on the shift. I apologize. I didn't mean to pry. He turned his attention back to the art. Well, Isla, it was a pleasure to meet someone who appreciates Zobel. He gave me one last, charming smile, and then he simply walked away, melting back into the crowd. I stood there, my mind racing. He was an anomaly. He was handsome, intelligent, and his approach was flawless. He had focused on me, disarmed me with his knowledge, made the connection to my boss, and then retreated without asking for a thing. It was either a masterful piece of social engineering, or he was genuinely just a man who liked art. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure which. And that, more than anything, was what unnerved me. The next day, a bouquet of flowers arrived at the estate. Not ostentatious roses, but a simple, elegant arrangement of white orchids. The card was addressed to me, Isla, for a brief conversation. That was the highlight of an otherwise dull evening. Julian Cruz, my team, of course, had already vetted him. The flowers were x-rayed and scanned for listening devices before they were brought to me. His background check was clean, at least on the surface. Julian Cruz. He was a partner at a boutique investment firm. Graduated top of his class from Ateneo. No criminal record. No red flags. He was by all accounts a perfect gentleman. He texted me that afternoon. How he got my private number, I wasn't sure, but there were ways. It was both a red flag and, I had to admit, impressive. I hope the flowers weren't too forward. I'd love to continue our conversation about art sometime. Are you free for dinner this week? My training, my instincts, my entire professional being screamed no. He was a variable I couldn't control. He had breached my perimeter. The correct protocol was to shut it down, to block his number and erase him from my life. But Mr. Sandoval's words echoed in my head. You need a life outside these walls. And then there was a deeper, more dangerous feeling. A simple, human loneliness I rarely allowed myself to acknowledge. Julian was the first person in years who had looked at me and seen a woman, not a guard dog or a princess in a tower. He saw me as Isla Dot against every ounce of my better judgment. I typed back. I'd like that Dot. Our first date was at a small, quiet restaurant in a part of the city I knew had excellent sightlines and multiple exits. I arrived early and swept the room. He arrived on time and smiled when he saw me. I had a feeling you'd be early, he said with a chuckle. I like to be prepared, I replied. I can see that, he said, his eyes crinkling in a way that made my stomach do a strange, unfamiliar flip. Your father has you well trained. He thought my preparedness was a symptom of being a rich man's daughter, a cute quirk. He had no idea it was the core of my very being. The misconception was my armor, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of a desire to take it off. The dinner was easy. We talked about art, about books, about travel. He was a brilliant conversationalist. He asked about me, about my life, but in a way that felt like genuine curiosity, not an interrogation. I gave him the carefully constructed cover story. I helped my father with his philanthropic work. I managed the household. Vague, plausible lies. He told me about himself. He was an only child. His parents were professors. He had gotten into finance to please them, but what he really loved was history. He spoke with a quiet passion that was utterly convincing, as he dropped me off a block. Away from the estate, I would never compromise security by letting him see the gate. He didn't try to kiss me. He just took my hand. I had a wonderful time tonight, Isla, he said, his voice soft. Me too, I said, and the shocking thing was, it was true, as I walked the final block home, a war was raging inside me. My professional self was screaming. He's a con. He's playing you. This is how it starts. You're a target, but my other self, the lonely, 32-year-old woman who hadn't been on a real date in a decade, was whispering something else. What if he's not? What if he's real? That night, as I did my final security sweep of the grounds, I felt a crack in the fortress. Not in the walls of the estate, but in mine. And I didn't know if it was a breach I needed to repair or a door I needed to open. The weeks that followed our first date were a disorienting haze of cognitive dissonance. My professional mind, the cold, calculating part of me that had been forged in the crucible of special forces training, screamed that Julian Cruz was a variable I could not account for, a threat vector I had willingly invited past my perimeter. But my heart, a locked and barricaded room I had not entered in years. was cautiously, traitorously opening the door. He was a master of the long game. Our dates were never extravagant. Quiet dinners at hole-in-the-wall restaurants, walks through the Ajala Triangle Gardens, a visit to a small, independent bookstore in Makati. He was creating an illusion of normalcy, a life that was the polar opposite of the gilded cage he assumed I lived in. He never pushed. He never pried, not overtly. He simply created a space that felt safe, and he waited for me to walk into it. And to my eternal shame, I did. I let him into my life in small, carefully measured increments. He was the first person I had ever brought to the estate for a non-business reason. I introduced him to Mr. Sandoval one Sunday afternoon. We had tea on the Grand Lanai overlooking the gardens, a carefully controlled meeting with two of my security team shadowing us from a discreet distance. Mr. Sandoval was gracious. His eyes, as always, missing nothing. He engaged Julian in a conversation about finance, about history. Julian was brilliant, holding his own, charming without being sycophantic. He never once asked Mr. Sandoval for anything. His entire focus, his entire performance was on me. He'd laugh at a small joke I made, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He'd gently touch my hand when he was making a point. He was selling a story, and the story was that he was utterly, completely captivated by the billionaire's shy, quiet daughter. He seems like a fine young man, Mr. Sandoval told me. Later that evening, after Julian had left, we were in his study, a vast room lined with books and artifacts from his travels. He was looking at the photo of his late wife and daughter. He makes you smile, Isla, a real smile. I have not seen that in a long time. He's nice, I said, the word feeling inadequate. Be careful, Anak, he said, his voice soft. The world outside these walls is full of men who see you only as a path to me. I want you to be happy, but more than that, I want you to be safe. His words were a warning, but they were also a blessing. He was giving me permission to be human, to take a risk. And I wanted to, God, I wanted to. The red flags, when they started, were so small, so subtle, I almost missed them. They were questions, always couched in a loving concern that made them seem innocuous. We were having dinner. You seem to carry so much weight on your shoulders, he said, his expression one of deep empathy. It must be stressful managing a place like that. How many staff are there? Do they all live on the property? A question about personnel numbers. A potential vulnerability. Another time, walking by the perimeter wall. It's beautiful how you can't even see the security from the outside. He mused, looking at the bougainvillea-covered walls. The technology must be incredible. Is it all centrally controlled? A question about security infrastructure. A probe for weaknesses. He was brilliant at it. He would embed the questions in long, romantic conversations, flanking them with compliments and declarations of affection. He was mapping my life, my home, my father's world, one innocent question at a time. My personal self would answer him, basking in his attention. My professional self would stand back, silent, taking notes in a cold, dark corner of my mind. Anomaly detected. Threat level increasing. The conflict inside me was a silent, brutal civil war. I started a new file on my encrypted server, a file hidden even from my own team. I called it Asset J. I began a log. Every question he asked that brushed against a security protocol. Every casual inquiry about Mr. Sandoval's schedule. Every compliment that seemed designed to elicit a specific piece of information. It all went into the log. Part of me hoped it was a pointless exercise, that my paranoia was getting the best of me. Part of me knew with a cold, sinking certainty that I was building a case against the first man who had ever made me feel seen. The most dangerous moment came when he brought up my family's roots. He knew Mr. Sandoval was from the Visayas. Your father has that beautiful painting of the rice terraces in his study, he said one afternoon. It reminds me of my own family's province. I would love to see your ancestral home sometime. The one in Cybelum. It must be beautiful. He was fishing, probing for other assets, other properties, trying to gauge the depth of the family's wealth and connections. It's a simple place, I said, my voice carefully neutral. My father hasn't been back in years. A lie. Mr. Sandoval and I went back every year. A quiet pilgrimage to the place where he had been born. Still, Julian pressed gently, heritage is so important. You should take me sometime. I'd love to see where you come from. He was trying to weave himself into the fabric of my past, into my very identity. It was the most sophisticated, most dangerous move he had made yet, and it was the one that finally pushed me over the edge. That night, after he had gone, I went down to the control room. The file asset J was no longer enough. The time for passive observation was over. It was time to go hunting. The background check my team had run when the flowers arrived had been a standard Tier 1 check. It scanned public records, credit histories, social media. It was designed to catch common criminals and stalkers. Julian was none of those things. I needed to run a Tier 5 check. The kind of deep dive, off-the-books investigation that involves backdoors into government databases, confidential informants, and a network of former Special Forces contacts who specialized in making people's digital lives an open book. Was a complete violation of privacy. It was probably illegal, and it was absolutely necessary. I made the calls. I sent the encrypted emails. I pulled every string I had. And I waited that the information came back in a slow, ugly trickle over the next week. The first piece was small but significant. The investment. Firm he supposedly worked for, Cruise Capital, was a shell corporation registered to a post office box in the Cayman Islands. It had no employees, no assets. It was a ghost. The next piece was bigger. His parents, the ones he had claimed were retired professors from UP, did not exist. There was no record of any Julian Cruz graduating from Ateneo in his age bracket. His entire educational and professional history was a meticulously crafted fiction. The final, devastating piece of the puzzle came from an old contact of mine in Israeli intelligence. He had managed to crack the encryption on a series of offshore bank transfers. The shell corporation, Cruise Capital, had been receiving monthly payments, large ones, from a holding company. And that holding company was a known subsidiary of a rival corporation, run by Mr. Sandoval's greatest and most ruthless competitor. The man I had been dating for 2 months was not Julian Cruz, the charming investment banker. He was a corporate spy, a high-level con artist. And his target was Enrique Sandoval. I was not the object of his affection. I was the tool. The key. The dumb, lonely, rich girl who would grant him access to the kingdom. I stood in the cold, dark silence of the control room, the reports glowing on the screen in front of me. The heartbreak was a physical thing. A cold, heavy weight that settled in my chest, making it hard to breathe. It wasn't the wild, screaming grief of a lover scorned. It was the quiet, absolute agony of a professional who had been compromised. I had let my emotions, my loneliness, override my training. I had failed in my primary duty, to see the threat. He had used my own humanity against me, and the shame of that was a poison that burned hotter than any anger. But the anger was there. Oh, it was there. It was a cold, quiet rage, gathering like a storm cloud. He had not just lied to me. He had used my loyalty to Mr. Sandoval as a weapon. He had targeted the one sacred thing in my life. And for that, there could be no forgiveness. There could only be a reckoning. Saturday, August 2nd, 2025. This was the day I would know for sure. This was the day I would get the final, undeniable piece of proof I needed. I had spent the week playing the part of a woman falling in love. I had been warm, affectionate, open. I had let him believe his con was working perfectly. Tonight, we were having dinner at my apartment, the small private suite I kept on the estate grounds. It was the first time I had ever let him this deep into the fortress. He would see it as a sign of ultimate trust. I saw it as bringing the enemy into my kill box. I was telling him about Mr. Sandoval's day, playing the part of the dutiful daughter. My father is so exhausted, I sighed, swirling the wine in my glass. He had to get up at 4 this morning for an unscheduled call. Something urgent. A lie. Mr. Sandoval had been up at 4, but it was for his morning meditation, as it was every morning. The unscheduled call was a piece of bait I had invented. Julian took the bait. He feigned a look of loving concern. Oh, the poor man. He works too hard. Was it that call with the Tokyo Consortium? I read they were having some trouble. That must be so stressful for him. The wine glass in my hand did not tremble. My expression did not change, but inside my head a steel door slammed shut. The world went silent. The call with the Tokyo Consortium. It was a highly confidential negotiation, known only to Mr. Sandoval and 3 other people on his executive board. It had never been mentioned in the press. There was no article he could have read. There was absolutely no way he could have known about it unless he had a source, an informant, someone inside the company, on the board itself. This wasn't just an external threat. The call was coming from inside the house. He was not just a con artist trying to get in. He was the visible face of a much deeper, more dangerous conspiracy. That was it. The final, irrevocable proof. The last piece of the puzzle clicking into place with a horrifying, beautiful certainty. I looked at him across the table. He was smiling at me, his eyes full of fake sympathy. He had no idea what had just happened. He had no idea that in trying to demonstrate his inside knowledge, he had just signed his own death warrant. He still saw me as Isla, the lonely heiress, the easy mark. He had no idea that in that single silent moment, Isla had died. And in her place was Vargas, the head of security, the hunter. I smiled back at him, a slow, warm, loving smile. Yes, I said, my voice a perfect imitation of a concerned daughter. It was the Tokyo call. He's so worried. Tell me, what did you read about it? The game had changed. The romance was over. The counter-operation had just begun. And I was going to let him lead me all the way to the heart of his conspiracy. And then I was going to burn it all to the ground, with him right in the center of the fire. The 6 weeks following my discovery were the most difficult and exhilarating of my professional life. I was playing 2 roles at once. In the evenings, I was Isla, the loving, slightly naive girlfriend, growing ever more devoted to the charming man who had captured her heart. I listened to his stories. I laughed at his jokes. I let him believe he was a master manipulator, slowly and skillfully, peeling back the layers of the sheltered heiress. By day, and in the long, silent hours of the night, I was Vargas, the head of security, the hunter. I was using the trust I was feigning to build a cage around him, and he was helping me construct it, bar by gleaming bar. My counter-operation was codenamed Amahan, the same name as my grandfather's resistance cell, a private homage to the dual legacies of strength I was channeling. The objective was simple, not just to stop Julian, but to let him get so close to his prize that when the trap sprung, the whiplash of his failure would be absolute. We needed him to deliver himself, along with his entire conspiracy, into our hands. The bait had to be perfect. With Mr. Sandoval's full, furious cooperation, we created a ghost project. We called it Project Amahan, a nod to my own private joke. It was a revolutionary geothermal energy initiative he was supposedly planning to build in his family's home province of Sibalam Antique. We fabricated everything: Geological surveys, stunning architectural renderings, and most importantly, a financial prospectus that promised to be worth billions. The plans for Project Amahan became the prize Julian was hunting. I became the willing leak. I would come home from a meeting with my father, looking stressed. Julian ever, the concerned boyfriend, would ask what was wrong. It's this new project, I'd sigh, letting him pry the details from me. This geothermal thing in the province. It's all very secret. The security protocols are a nightmare. I fed him a steady diet of high-level fabricated intel. Final piece of the deception was the most dangerous. We had to give him a path in. A week before the trap was to be sprung, I staged a tearful emotional breakdown. I feel so trapped, Julian, I cried into his shoulder one evening. My father is so paranoid about this Amahanject. He's doubling the security patrols, but it's leaving a blind spot near the West Garden. And he changes the study's keypad code every night now. It's exhausting. The next day, I accidentally let him see me looking at my phone, where a text message from Sandoval Security listed the new keypad code for the study. A code one had invented that morning. I let him see it for only a second, but I knew his eyes were sharp. He had taken the bait. All of it. The date for the infiltration was set for the night of Mr. Sandoval's annual corporate gala. Julian, I knew from the intel my team had gathered, was not planning on attending. He was planning on using the cover of the gala, knowing my security team and I would be focused on the event, to make his move. He thought he was brilliant. He had no idea I had written his script for him. Are you sure about this, Isa? Mr. Sandoval asked me that night as I adjusted his body. He was dressed for the gala, but we weren't going. We were going to the control room. His face was a mask of grim resolve. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Sir, I said. He hurt you, he said, his voice low. It wasn't a question. He made a professional miscalculation, I replied, my voice cold. And even tonight we correct it. He nodded, his eyes full of a fierce fatherly pride. Give him hell, Anak. The control room was my sanctuary. A dark, cold space, its only light coming from the wall of 40 different monitors. Showing every angle of the estate, Mr. Sandoval sat in a chair behind me, a silent observer. I stood at the main console, an earpiece in my ear, a microphone. In front of me, I was the conductor of a silent, deadly orchestra. My team, 6 of my best operators, were in position, hidden in the shadows of the estate. Waiting for my command dot at 21:30, I saw him on the perimeter camera. A dark shape, moving, with a fluid, confident grace through the trees bordering the estate. He was dressed in black tactical gear. He was an amateur, but a talented one. Heads up, team, I said, my voice a low, calm murmur into the comms. Asset is approaching the west wall. Hold positions. Let him come. I watched on camera 12 as he approached the section of the wall where I had told him the vibration sensors were faulty. He scaled it with ease. He was in. He had breached the first layer of defense. On my monitor, a small icon of him blinked to life on a digital map of the estate, a mouse entering. A maze of my own design. He's on the grounds, I reported. Phase 1 is a go. I have the eye. For the next 20 minutes, I watched him move through the gardens. Every step he took, every shadow he used, was a path I had anticipated. He moved towards the blind spot in the patrol route I had invented for him. He was cautious, professional, but his arrogance was a fatal flaw. He believed my lies. He believed he was smarter than the billionaire's sad little daughter. He reached the main house. I switched my focus to the internal cameras. I watched on camera 24 as he used a glass cutter to silently remove a pane from a window on the ground floor. A window I had my team secretly unlatch that afternoon. Asset is entering the house, I said into the comms. West Gallery. He's clean. Stay dark. He moved through the silent, darkened halls of the house like a phantom. I tracked his progress, camera to camera. Camera 24 to 27, down the main hall. He was heading for the study just as I had planned. My heart was a cold, steady drum. There was no emotion, no anger, only a profound professional focus. This was not personal. This was a threat neutralization. He reached the study. I zoomed in with camera 32, a high-definition camera hidden in a bookshelf. I could see the sweat beading on his forehead. He thought he was in the clear. He approached the keypad on the study door and entered the code I had let him see. 81725, the date of his first email to my Shell account. A little poetic detail. I couldn't resist. The light on the keypad flashed green. The heavy door clicked open. He slipped inside. He's in the box, I said into the comms. Alpha team, move to secondary positions. Bravo team, hold. On my mark. I watched him, a rat in a cage he didn't yet know was a cage. The study was dark, the only light coming from the moon through the large, supposedly bulletproof windows. He moved with a new confidence now. He was at the heart of the kingdom. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on the large antique safe behind Mr. Sandoval's desk. The prize dot, he approached it, pulling a small, sophisticated device from his pack to crack the electronic lock. He didn't need it. I had left the safe unlocked. He spun the handle. It turned with a satisfyingly heavy thump. He pulled the heavy steel door open, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. He reached inside, expecting to feel the smooth, cool plastic of a hard drive containing the plans for Project Amihan. He found nothing. The safe was empty except for a single slim tablet propped up in the center. As the door opened, its screen flickered to life. My face, pre-recorded, filled the screen, my expression calm and cold. "Hello, Julian," my voice said, coming from the tablet's small speaker. The sound was stark in the silent room. I watched his face on my monitor. The triumphant grin evaporated, replaced by a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. "I know. You're not a fan of my father's work," my recorded voice continued, "but you should have paid more attention to his personal project, me." He stumbled back from the safe, his eyes wide with horror, the truth finally crashing down on him. "You thought I was the key," my voice said, a cold, clinical statement. "You were wrong. I was the lock. I was the cage." On my console, I pressed a single red button, and you, my voice on the tablet concluded, have been compromised. The effect was instantaneous and silent. The heavy wooden door to the study, which he had left open, swung shut with a deep, solid thunk as a powerful magnetic lock engaged. The windows, which he thought were his escape route, were suddenly blocked as silent, reinforced steel shutters descended from the ceiling, sealing him in total darkness. Then the main lights in the room snapped on. Not the soft, warm lamplight, but the harsh, bright, white glare of the tactical LED panels I had hidden in the ceiling. The room was now a sterile, white box. He was trapped. I leaned into my microphone. My live voice now filled the study, coming from hidden speakers. "The game is over, Julian," I said, my voice a calm, conversational whisper that was more terrifying than any scream. "Welcome to your debriefing." On my monitors, I watched him spin around, his face a mask of pure animal panic. He was no longer the master spy. He was just a rat, and my trap had just snapped shut. Start writing Act V. The harsh tactical. Lights of the study bleached all the color from the room, turning Julian's handsome, panicked face into a ghastly black and white portrait of terror. He spun around, a cornered animal, his eyes darting from the shuttered windows to the magnetically sealed door. There was no escape. He was my prisoner, the door behind him open with a soft, pneumatic hiss. I walked in. I wasn't wearing the dress I had worn for our date. I had changed into my work uniform, simple black tactical pants, a gray turtleneck, and an earpiece nestled in my ear. I was not holding a weapon. My only prop was the tablet I had left for him in the safe. I was calm. I was in control. This was my room, my fortress, my kill box. Isla, what is this? He stammered, his voice a pathetic imitation of the confident charmer from an hour ago. Is this some kind of joke? A test from your father? My father, as you call him, is upstairs, enjoying a quiet evening, I said, my voice even and conversational. I stopped 10 feet away from him. And no, this is not a test. This is a debriefing, and it is long overdue. I looked him up and down, my gaze as cold and clinical as a medical scanner. Let's start at the beginning, shall we? The charity art auction? Your approach was flawless. You didn't approach me as a guard. You didn't approach me as an accessory. You approached me as a person. You talked about the art. You made me believe you saw me. I gave him a small, cruel smile. It was a masterful performance. A lesser operative would have been completely taken in. His face was a storm of confusion. Operative? What are you talking about? Isla, you're scaring me. Stop using that name, I said, my voice dropping an octave, losing its conversational tone, and taking on the hard, flat edge of a command. Isla was the target. She doesn't exist anymore. I took a step closer. You were meticulous, Julian, or whatever your real name is. The slow burn romance. The carefully selected, non-threatening date locations. The way you embedded your intelligence gathering in compliments and feigned concern. I held up the tablet, which now showed a transcript of our conversations with certain questions of, his highlighted in red, how many staff are there? Is the security centrally controlled? I'd love to see your ancestral home in Cybelum sometime. Every question was a probe, I continued. Every moment of intimacy was a calculated move to gain my trust, to lower my guard. You were building a psychological profile, looking for the cracks you could exploit. I shook my head, a gesture of mock pity. And you found them. You found the loneliness. You found the years of isolation. You found the small, stupid part of me that wanted to believe you were real. And you used it. The color was draining from his face as he began to understand the depth of his miscalculation. He was not dealing with a scorned lover. But you made one mistake, Julian, I said, my voice low. One fatal, arrogant mistake. Your entire operation was built on a single flawed premise. I let the silence hang in the air, a palpable, crushing weight. You assumed I was the daughter. I let the words land, watching as the comprehension, the true, soul-shattering horror of his situation finally dawned in his eyes. You saw a quiet woman standing next to a powerful man, and you projected a fantasy onto me, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. You saw a princess in a tower, a soft target, a simple, emotional girl who could be easily manipulated. It never once occurred to you to ask what my actual job was. I took another step closer until I could see, the sweat beading on his upper lip. I am not his daughter, I said, my voice ablaze in the silent room. I am his head of security. The confession, when it finally broke him, was not a scream. It was a small, choked gasp, the sound of a man's entire world collapsing inward. He stumbled back, his legs hitting the edge of Mr. Sandoval's desk, and he sank into the chair, his face a mask of utter ruin. The charming con artist was gone, vaporized. All that was left was the terrified, third-rate spy who had just realized he had tried to con the warden of his own prison for the past 6 weeks. I continued, my voice relentless. While you thought you were seducing an heiress, you were actually the primary subject of a counterintelligence operation. Codenamed Amahan, by the way. I thought you'd appreciate the poetry. I swiped the screen on the tablet. A satellite image of his real apartment building in a different part of the city appeared. This is where you really live. A 2-bedroom. Rental paid for by a holding company registered in Panama. I swiped again. Bank statements. These are your offshore accounts. You're not as rich as you pretend to be, are you, Julian? Most of this is just operational funds. You're a hired hand. A well-paid one, but a disposable one. I swiped again. A complex organizational chart appeared on the screen, a web of names and corporations with his face in the center. And this is your entire life. Your real name isn't Julian Cruz. It's Marco Reyes, a disgraced ex-intelligence agent from the military, dishonorably discharged for selling state secrets. You were recruited by Gentech, our primary competitor. Your handler is their executive VP, a man named Robert Lim. He stared at the screen, his face ashen. He was seeing his own ghost, but the most fascinating part, I said, walking slowly around the desk until I was standing over him, was the mole, your source inside our company. You couldn't have known about the Tokyo Consortium call. Without one, it took us a while. But your little slip of the tongue tonight gave us the final piece we needed to confirm it. I leaned down, my voice a whisper. It was Mr. Chun on my father's board of directors. He's been selling Sandoval Tech's secrets to Gentech for the past 2 years. You were just his delivery boy? I had laid his entire life bare. I had dissected him piece by piece and shown him the ugly, pathetic truth of his own existence. The humiliation was absolute. Why? He finally choked out, his voice a broken rasp. If you knew, why let it go on for so long? Because, I said, straightening up, stopping you was never the point. A cockroach like you can always be replaced. The goal was to follow you back to your nest, to identify the entire infestation. I turned and pointed to the large dark monitor on the study wall. The goal was to get all of you all at once. The monitor flickered to life. It was a multi-panel display showing what looked like live news feeds and drone footage from across Metro Manila, the bait, Project Amahan, the geothermal plant. And Cybalom was a ghost I invented for you, I said conversationally. While you were chasing it, I was mapping your world. And as we've been having this little chat, my father has been having a conversation of his own with the director of the National Bureau of Investigation. On one screen, alive, feed showed a team of NBI agents in tactical gear storming a luxury apartment in Rockwell Center. That's Robert Lim's penthouse, I said calmly, your handler. I imagine he's surprised. Another screen switched to a view of a corporate office tower in Ortigas. That's the shell corporation you work for. All your data is being seized as we speak. A final screen showed a quiet tree-lined street in Das Marigas village. A black SUV was parked in front of a sprawling mansion. 2 men in suits were escorting another, older man out of his front door. And that, I said, my voice cold as stone, is Mr. Chun, your mole. It seems he won't be attending any more board meetings. I turned back to Julian. His eyes were wide with a horror that went beyond his own capture. He was watching his entire world being systematically and simultaneously annihilated. Live. In high definition. You see, Julian, I said softly. You used me to get to my dad, but I used you to get to everyone. Your whole network, your whole life's work, gone, erased, all because you looked at me and saw a rich girl, and not the one person in the world you should have been afraid of. The door to the study opened. My team, Alpha 1 and Alpha 2, entered, silent and professional. They did not look at me. They walked to Julian, who sat slumped and broken in the chair, and hauled him to his feet. He didn't resist. He was a hollowed-out shell. As they led him away, His eyes met mine one last time. They held no anger, only a profound, shattering understanding of the magnitude of his mistake. I stood alone in the white, silent room for a long time. Then I turned off the tactical lights, restored the warm, soft lamplight, and walked back to the control room. Mr. Sandoval was standing by the monitors, watching the news reports that were already starting to break. He turned as I entered. He didn't say anything. He just opened his arms. And for the first time since I was a child, I walked into them. He held me for a long moment, his hand stroking my hair. "It's over, Isa," he whispered. "The threat is neutralized, sir," I corrected, my voice muffled against his shoulder. He pulled back, his hands on my shoulders, and looked at me, his eyes full of a deep, fatherly love. "You did it. You protected us. You protected everything." "It's my job," I said. He smiled, a sad, wise smile. "It is so much more than that." He looked at the screens, at the chaos I had unleashed upon the city's corporate underworld. "When all of this is over, when the noise dies down, let's go home, sir." "Home," he repeated. "To Cybelum. No security sweeps, no threat assessments, just for a week. We can walk on the beach. We can eat the mangoes from your grandmother's old tree. We can be a family." I looked at him and then at the monitors, at the grid of camera feeds that represented my world. The fortress was secure. The enemies were vanquished. The battle was won, but he was right. The victory was not the point. The point was what we were protecting. "Yes," I said, a real smile touching my lips for the first time that night. "I'd like that very much." My world was a grid of interlocking fields of fire. But for the first time, I realized that a home was not just a fortress to be defended. It was also a quiet place to return to. And I was finally ready to go home. The fortress in Manila had been a place of shadows and secrets, of hushed commands and the silent, sleepless hum of technology. It was a world I had built, a world I commanded. But it was not a world that knew the sun, the house in Cybelum. The one Mr. Sandoval had always just called home was the opposite. It was a sprawling, single-story structure of dark, fragrant Malawi wood and woven bamboo, built on a cliff overlooking the turquoise expanse of the Sulu Sea. It had no perimeter walls, no motion sensors, no control room. Its only security was the endless blue of the ocean and the quiet, watchful loyalty of the mountains at its back. For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely, terrifyingly exposed. And for the first time, I felt completely, utterly at peace. It had been 6 months since that night. 6 months since the name Julian Cruz, or rather, Marco Reyes, had been plastered across every news outlet. The poster boy for a massive corporate espionage scandal that had rocked the Manila business world to its core. He and his entire network, including the disgraced Mr. Chun from our board, were now navigating a different kind of fortress, one with actual iron bars. The threat was neutralized. The war was over. And as he had promised, Mr. Sandoval had brought me home. My days here were a strange new rhythm. I still woke at 0500, my internal clock still hardwired for vigilance. But instead of running the perimeter, I would walk down the stone steps carved into the cliff face to the small, private beach below. I would take off my shoes and walk along the shore, the cool, wet sand a shock to feet, more accustomed to the hard rubber solace of tactical boots. In the beginning, my eyes would constantly scan the horizon, my mind automatically cataloging potential threats. Fishing boat 2 kilometers out, no hostile posture. Ridgeline to the east, multiple points of ingress but no cover. The training was a ghost that walked beside me, a reflex I couldn't switch off, but slowly, over weeks of sunrises that painted the sea in strokes of pink and gold, the ghost began to recede. My focus began to shift. I started to notice the intricate patterns the waves left on the sand. I learned to distinguish the calls of the different seabirds. I watched the local fishermen and their small bancas, their movements a timeless, graceful dance with the tide. My world, which for so long had been a grid of threat vectors, was slowly, miraculously, resolving itself into a landscape. The hypervigilance was being replaced by simple, quiet observation. I was learning to see the world not as a battlefield, but simply as the world. "You look different here, Isa," Mr. Sandoval said one afternoon. We were sitting on the wide veranda, a pitcher of calamansi juice sweating between us. He was not in one of his tailored suits. He wore a loose linen barong, his feet bare. He looked 10 years younger. "The soldier is gone from your eyes." "She's still here, sir," I replied, my gaze drifting to the fishing boat on the horizon. "Just on leave," he smiled. "For so long, I relied on the soldier. I needed her. But I worry that in asking you to be my shield, I prevented you from being anything else." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "The legal proceedings are finished. The company is secure. Your job, the one I hired you for all those years ago, is done. You have protected me, Isa. You have protected my life's work. You have earned your peace 1,000 times over." I looked at him, confused. "Sir, my job is never done." "But it can be," he said, his voice gentle. "It can be if you choose it. You're 32 years old. You have a lifetime ahead of you that doesn't have to be lived in the shadows of my fears." He paused. "I am launching a new foundation. The Sandoval Foundation for Education. Its mission will be to build schools and provide scholarships for gifted children in the provinces, starting here in Ceylon. It will require a different kind of protection. Not guards and cameras, but intelligence, strategy, and a fierce will to protect the vulnerable." He looked at me, his eyes full of a father's hope. "I want you to be its president, its CEO. I don't need a head of security anymore, Anak. I need a partner, a successor." The offer hung in the warm, salty air. It was more than a job. It was a door to a different life, a different future. A life where my skills could be used to build, not just to defend. Where my mind could be a tool for creation, not just for neutralization. I don't know what to say, sir," I whispered. "You don't have to say anything now," he said, leaning back. "Just think about it. Think about who you want to be when you are not on duty." The test came a few days later. I was reading on the veranda, lost in a novel, something I hadn't had the mental space to do in years. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the road that ran behind the property. A car backfiring dot, in less than a second, I was on my feet. My body moved. Without thought, my posture dropped, my hands were up, my head was on a swivel, my eyes scanning the tree line for a threat. My heart was pounding, the adrenaline a familiar electric jolt. Report, location, threat assessment. The soldier was back, instantly and completely. And then, just as quickly, she was gone. I heard a goat bleat in the distance. I heard the gentle rustle of the palm fronds in the breeze. I smelled the salt in the air. There was no threat. It was just a sound. I stood there for a long moment, my body still thrumming with the ghost of the adrenaline. I took a deep, slow breath, and then another. I consciously unclenched my fists. I straightened my back. I was not in Manila. I was not on duty. I was safe. I walked back to my chair and sat down. I picked up my book. My hands were still trembling, slightly, but I forced them to be still. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, forcing the soldier to stand down, forcing myself to be at peace. It was a new kind of training, a new kind of discipline, and I knew in that moment that it was a battle I was going to win. That evening, I stood on the cliff's edge, watching the sun bleed into the horizon, painting the sky in colors so beautiful they broke my heart. Mr. Sandoval was in the kitchen, humming an old condiment song as he taught himself how to cook. His mother's sinigang recipe, the sharp, tangy smell, a comforting reminder of his presence, taught my revenge against Julian Cruz had been absolute. I had dismantled his life with the same precision he had used to try and dismantle mine. The victory had been satisfying in a cold, clean, professional way, but it was not the victory that had brought me here. It was not the victory that had brought me peace. The true victory was this quiet moment, this feeling of the warm wind on my face, the sound of a man I loved as a father humming in the kitchen, the astonishing, terrifying, beautiful possibility of a future I had never allowed myself to imagine. I was still a warrior. The soldier would always be a part of me. But I was no longer just a shield. I was no longer just the head of security. I was not just Vargas, standing there with the last light of the day on my face and the whole of the sea before me. I finally felt like I could be Isla again. And I was finally, truly home.